Hello, everyone. Just want to thank you all for joining us today. We're going to be having a discussion about how the different engineering productivity frameworks, how you can employ them in your organization. So this is a lead dev webinar. It's created in partnership with Harness. The plan today is that the webinar will be about 45 minutes. And then after that, I and the rest of the panelists will be in the lead dev Slack. So you can, any questions that we don't get to, will be in the channel Effective Teams, and we'll be tackling your questions there. We will try and take at least a couple of questions live. So do use the Q&A feature here in Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can, probably towards the end of the session. I promise I am watching the list. So I'm going to get started with some introductions. First of all, my name is Lorna Mitchell. I'm VP of Developer Experience at Redocly. We make tools for OpenAPI and documentation platforms. I am joined by some awesome engineering leaders on the panel today who are ready to share their experiences and insights. So I'm going to get started with some intros and ask each of them to tell you who they are. Martin, would you like to start?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I'm Martin Armstrong, probably not the Martin you were expecting. I'm a senior solutions architect at Harness. I've been here about 3 years, but I have about over a decade of experience in the DevOps field. I'm pretty excited to be here, just to join the panel, see what we get up to.
And we are pretty excited to have you. AB, you can go next.
Hi, my name is Avi, and I'm an EM at Factorial in Barcelona. Before I switched to EMing, I was a developer on multiple core teams and a DX team. So I'm happy to be here to talk about developer experience.
Excellent. I am also happy. Finally, let's have Bruno. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Bruno. I lead the product side of developer experience here at Booking.com. And that's anything from the moment where developers get their hands dirty with code, all the way until the code gets to production and anything in between. So we have around eight teams inside of our department working to serve our users or the developers. And I'm super excited to be here to share some of our practices.
Excellent. Well, you have met your panel. Today, we'll be providing space for these excellent individuals to share their approaches to developer experience and the impact that they see it make in their organizations. They're all pretty experienced technical leaders, so they have great advice for us on how to know what to do, how they do it in the context of the roles that they're in, and how to do it in your role where it might feel like there's a lot going on already. So to get us started, I would like to start with a question about how to start. This one's for you, AB. What's your process for identifying something that you can immediately improve when you're working with a new team or organization?
Thank you, Lorna. My process in identifying something that should improve or I can improve in a new team or a new organization involves gathering qualitative data and quantitative data. There's this saying that says, seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And this means that the most important part of the equation is the developers, those who you're going to be improving something for. So I start with speaking to them, asking them questions like, what are your pain points? What stops you from being the best productive version of yourself? And I do not stop there. I also take it a step further by asking them, do you have any ideas about how this can be improved? Because sometimes you just find out that the solution has been there all along, but there hasn't been someone to implement it. And I'm not here with all the solutions. So I try to involve them in coming up with solutions. Then the next part will be gathering quantitative data. This would be because we're trying to find out how we can pinpoint what the root cause is as opposed to fixing a symptom. So gathering some things like CI/CD metrics, logs, issue tracking, and seeing whether we can identify a pattern that helps us see what the problem exactly is. For example, let's say developers tell you, I have issues with speed. I cannot ship as fast as I want to. my dev environment takes 2 hours to boot, that's qualitative data. You don't just jump and say, okay, right now we need to improve dev environment boot time. We need to make it shorter. You have to gather quantitative data, which involves things like, okay, so what is the boot time for all the devs? What hardware are they using? What's the OS? And from there, you can identify a pattern. Maybe it's not the process that's the problem, it's the hardware, and we have to upgrade it for some devs. So I would say that in general, I apply gathering of qualitative data and quantitative data to identify what needs to change.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot of tips there that maybe we can use. The next question is for Bruno, and it really draws on that sort of qualitative piece. How do you help engineering managers to identify what a developer experience team can help them with? And then how do they find the resource to kind of commit that bandwidth to be successful with a developer experience project? What's your approach?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm going to build up on Abe's point about being customer driven, right? I ideally would love for us to be able to reach to the EMs before the EMs come and reach to us for processes. And the way we normally do this is by first of all obsessing about their flows. What do they do on a day-to-day basis, and what blocks them from shipping features to the end users, and basically mapping all of this into flows that are common to the majority of our developers and teams. And that's what we call a golden path or a paved path. And that's where we try to improve and advertise as much as possible on what we are doing and the new features we are bringing. And we use internal communication tools to be able to do that. We have podcasts within the company that we can invite both users, but also us that are building the tools and the processes for us to collaborate, identify the things that we've done that helped them, or the bottlenecks that we've created possibly that they're not happy with. And so we have that live events where we can gather feedback, but also have the community, much like we're doing here from a discussion perspective. That's one way to do it. We write a ton about what we're doing and the benefits that brings both to the users, our developers, but also the end users, the folks that use Booking.com. So yeah, we hope in that ecosystem that we can both share what we're doing and how we are solving their problem, but also hear from them from a feedback perspective. Again, building on what Abe said about metrics, both qualitative and quantitative metrics that we can gather in order to be able to identify what to do next and how we're going to go about doing next, but also how we're going to roll out to the entire community of developers that we have here at Booking.com.
I want to add something to that, because in the bid to try to get feedback, there's something called survey overwhelm, where developers are tired of filling surveys. They're like, not another survey, please. So in that case, I think it helps if the devs can already see the improvements that have come as a result of previous feedback that they gave. So you don't just always ask for feedback. Give us feedback about this and about that. They need to see that improvements are actually taking place. Also, if you have a team of maybe 800 developers or 600 developers, maybe you want to divide your feedback into different batches, such that those that feel the first feedback are not those that feel the next, so that people do not get overwhelmed with always filling surveys.
I like that. And there's a real thread of communicating really well, I feel like, is coming through every time. Martin, you've been a bit quiet, and I really want to pick your brain on this. Sometimes we talk about developer experience, and it's very easy to be like, oh yeah, there's a tool for that. How do you find the balance between one tool that does more or less everything, or all of the correct tools for each individual part of the process? Do you have a way, how do you decide when you need to add something or when we should manage with what we have?
Sure. Yeah, I think balancing tool selection and ending up with a plethora of tools is a common challenge across the industry, because choosing the right tool in itself is a balancing act. Choosing the right tool for the business outcomes, choosing the right tools for developers and engineers that are keen to use it. It's also about choosing a tool that is able to change along with the business changes as well as you expand and grow. Because what tends to happen is you pick a tool, after 2 years, you might have to migrate off it or just keep it, and it just keeps building up. And I think one of the biggest failures we do as leaders in companies is we don't really explain to developers and engineers why it is a specific tool has been chosen. It's a case of, here's a tool, go use it. And so as a developer, you're kind of disgruntled and you're like, okay, well, I could use this tool, but actually I prefer this tool, or I can just go build my own thing. Whereas if we're able to sit down with developers and say, hey, we're using this tool to reach this governance or this security audit or something, we're then able to get everyone on board. And so, ultimately, it's then easier to get people to walk with us along the same journey. I think one effective strategy I've seen is maybe using something like an internal developer portal. And I think that's why we've seen quite a rise of those, as well as platform engineering. If you're able to standardize, create templates, give developers golden paths, what you're able to do is basically make it easy for developers to do the right thing, but also make it difficult for them to do the wrong things. I think another thing that we're observing is most companies are kind of reaching out to consolidate their tools. So they might reach out to platform style providers who have a bunch of tools in their tool chain, which they can use, allowing for developers to reduce context switching and the cognitive overload that tends to happen. At that point, it's then easier for people to be a bit more understanding of the tools that are chosen, and you can say, hey, you can go to production without me. You don't need all of these bells and whistles. Yeah.
I really like that. And again, I'm hearing that theme of communication, and I'd love to hear from this one's for any of you, and maybe you all have something to share on what channels do you use to communicate the changes? Is it multiple channels? And who crafts that content? How do you approach it? Bruno?
That's a super interesting question. Yeah, I mean, being the size we are here at Booking.com, and for context, we have over 2,000 developers working in the company. There are several ways of doing this. We have internal intranets, we have developer portals, we have events that we throw quite a bit in-house, where we put together people in a room to talk a particular topic, and we go deeper into that. Again, that's a moment to get qualitative and quantitative feedback from folks, whilst keeping them aware of what's going on. But yeah, the short answer is multiple channels. Who crafts those things? Our product owners for the different tools and processes that we have in our developer experience department are normally the ones who are more in touch with the customer, and so together with the EMs, they're basically able to drive their community or drive their topic within the community. And so normally that comes from the EMs and the PMs, but quite a bit of time developer experience and the flow that we add to developer experience is something that the developer themselves are super passionate about. And so we see quite a bit that the developers themselves sparkle different conversations or topics. Those are the best moments, because you can really then pick their brain and sometimes even work from an open source, in-source perspective, and have them contribute to the developer experience themselves, which is a good tactic if you resource constrained to be able to get something done whilst already getting advocates for it, right? Which I think we're going to go down in this panel to talk about how we can advocate what we do. But yeah, Lorna, I hope I answered your question. Multiple, and PMs and EMs normally own their silos.
Yeah, I can echo that as well. I think when I joined Harness, we were around 200. We're now like 1,000. So initially it was all through Slack. That was pretty easy, but as we grew, there's just too many Slack channels. So you end up with many threads. So now we use a mixture of Confluence. We have kind of enablement sessions. So if a new product, we're able to kind of get people into a room to learn about the product. We also have some lunch and learns as well. And we also tend to do quite a lot of customer advisory boards. So it might just be, every quarter, get customers into a room, get them face to face with our product team and say, these are the challenges that you may have faced. How do we fix those going forwards?
I can add something there. For Factorial, we have 180 devs right now, but we have a dedicated DX team, and they are the ones in charge of disseminating this information. So we have a channel called Dev Changelog, which you find everything that has changed concerning development, tools, and all of that. But we also have the engineering channel where we start the conversations. Oh, this is wrong. We want to change this, and we're thinking of introducing this tool. What do you think? So that's where we have the talks about what tool to pick. But once it's done, you find the announcement on the Dev Changelog channel. This also helps because if you go on holidays and you get back, you need to know everything that has changed. You don't want to go and start to search all the threads and channels, so you just go to one place. And there was something that we also adopted, which was a dev newsletter every week. It's owned by DevEx, where they just write about all the changes, all the fun things that they're doing. And from there, you can also get information about what's changed.
Thank you, all of you. That was super interesting. I think all of us went, yeah, when someone said too many Slack channels, and I'm pretty sure the whole audience went, yeah, at the same time. AB, I want to pick up on that different skill sets comment that you just made, because I think the team shape's really important. When you're hiring for your team, how much do you look at the people that you have, and how does that influence your approach for that next human to add to the collection?
Wow. Okay, that's a very interesting question. I would say that if you want to keep your devs happy, which in turn translates into their retention, then you have to make sure that they are continually growing, which entails surrounding them with fellow devs who inspire them and challenge them. So you need to take into account the current shape of the team. If you have a team made of junior devs, you want them to grow. You want them to be inspired and actually challenged. So you would be searching for someone who is more senior, who is also interested in mentorship, because that's what they would likely be doing on the team. But if you have a team that's made up of more senior devs, you don't want a skill set redundancy. So you want to look for hires that complement their skill sets so that they can also be challenged. And if they're interested in actually teaching people and helping them grow, maybe you would add someone who isn't that senior to the team to give them that opportunity. Another thing I found really interesting is that aside the technical skill set, we still have the behavioral skill set, which is sometimes you have a team that's leaning more towards introversion, and you want to improve communication and collaboration. So you would want to hire somebody who brings in a different style of communication. Yeah, so I would say that for me, it goes a long way to determine who the next hire is.
And AB, can I pick your brain a little bit on this? Lorna, if you don't mind, I'm going to also ask some
Please.
questions. How do you go about defining the ratio of specialists and generalists to your DevEx team? Do you normally hire generalists, or do you go deeper into the different topics that you cater for and then look for specialists?
It depends. We try to have specialists because you would be solving a lot of deep problems, and if you are more of a generalist, then it's difficult to go in depth. So we try to have specialists, but also specialists have this issue that they're not really able to empathize totally with everyone. They focus more on, this is what I know, this is what I want to do, and this is what I can improve. So we also try to have generalists who can poke them and say, yes, you're doing this, but maybe we want to also take a look at this. So it's like a ratio of, let's say, 70 to 30, 70% with specialists because we want to get the job done, but 30% with generalists to help us take a full ground into consideration. I don't know if that helps or if I answered your question.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
Actually, I have one more question for Abby.
Go for it.
Oh, wow.
This is
Okay.
more along the lines of just personalities. How do you enforce that you don't hire someone who has an overpowering personality? Because you mentioned introverted teams, right? I've been in introverted teams, and whenever we had an extrovert come in, it was like, whoa, calm down. How do you manage that balance?
Okay, there was this thing I did one time that was very interesting. I was meant to hire someone, and I asked the team individually, I said, describe to me your ideal teammates. And they all wrote. And there was this one person who said, I know that I find it hard to achieve things. I'm always late to things. So I need somebody who is super structured, who can inspire me, and I can always see that they are doing their job, and then I am gingered to do mine. And there were those who said, we have a lot of people who talk a lot. I cannot stand one more person who talks a lot. So we would prefer somebody who is more introverted so that we can not spend 10 hours in a meeting that could last 30 minutes because everyone is talking. So I feel that having those conversations beforehand can help give you a clear picture of what you are searching for. And then you can tell, do I need somebody who is really extroverted, or do I need somebody who is a mix of both? Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Thanks.
This is great. That was a wonderful tangent. I am really just here to listen, and greatly enjoying it. If you are watching in the audience and you also would like to tangent us with some questions, then use the Q&A button down there, and we will get to any that we can in the session and the rest in Slack afterwards. So we talked a bit about the people, but I'd like to pivot it a bit more to talk about how you kind of practice your skills in the business content. So Bruno, this one's for you, and I want to know, how do you really engage developers to kind of get into your processes? How do you, what's your process for making other people use your process? Tell us.
Yeah, no, thank you. So for us, it's really important that we can materialize our processes into flows and pictures, right? I think a narrative is incredibly important for us to be able to not only explain what we're doing, but what we are going towards. And we find that it's easier for us to both align our teams internally, but also our developers in what we are trying to build, if we put that into the form of a flow, or many flows in our case, and pictures where we can say, hey, this is what we're building in terms of golden path, paved path, whatever you want to call, that should cater for the 80% of our community. And here is what the unpaved path looks like, right? We do believe that we don't want to put everyone into this paved path, because you can hinder innovation and changes. And so there's always an element of leaving people out of that to see what they can come up with. But yeah, essentially what we try to do is socialize as much as possible what that picture looks like, and the roadmap of what we are trying to achieve based on the struggles that they have today, right? So we obsess a ton about our users, our developers. We ask them a ton of questions. We have, to Abe's point, we make sure that we tell them what we're going to do when we ask the questions, and we map those into the form of roadmap and a picture that we can illustrate where we are trying to head to. And then by doing that, we get a bunch of feedback. By doing that, we get a bunch of criticism, which is awesome as well for you to change or adapt your flow. But also you get a bunch of advocates. And we find that in a large organization like ours, it's very important to have those change, sort of like the folks who want to be part of a change to help us drive it forward by explaining the benefits they're seeing themselves, right, when they use the tool. So that's in a nutshell how we do it.
This is good, and I really like that you're like hanging that whole process on the narrative and the storytelling, because I think humans are very evolved to kind of absorb information in that format. So I quite enjoyed that. I see that we've lost Martin, or at least lost Martin's camera. So we'll try and bring him back to you, continuity announcement. But I want to dig into something that you just said there, Bruno, and Amy, you might have a view on this as well. Like, you need those internal advocates and champions. Are those people that are officially part of the process, or are they just people that you find around the organization who align with your vision? How does that work?
Both, actually. So you can have those on the team who are okay, so we call them owners. So you're the owner of this process, you're the owner of getting people on board, and they do the advocacy and try to tell you, oh, this is this new shiny tool. This is why we are actually trying to adopt it. But then we find people who can test the tool and give like reviews of the tool. So people who this tool has helped, we can then tell them, do you mind maybe doing a video to explain how this tool helped you? And then if we can get 2 or 3 guys who can explain how this tool has helped them, we can also turn them into advocates while we on the team still advocate for the process.
Yeah, there is a point here that I'd love to go deep into, that we also have the leadership side of the company, right? And whilst we try to paint a picture that developer experience is very much a beautiful flow of asking developers for what they want and we give them, businesses also have needs, and that comes in form of checks, compliance checks or controls and things that need to happen whether the developer wants or not. And so for those specifically, we try to get champions from a leadership perspective in the different parts of the organizations for them to help us roll it forward. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that part as well. It's not all roses. There are things that the developers have to do whether they want it or not, because it's life. However, we try to make that as seamless as possible into the developer experience.
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those champions and sponsors further up the leadership tree who can make sure that what we do is so well aligned with the business and help us make the right things happen. I know that I have had those people in my corner on previous projects, and it's incredibly valuable.
Yep.
While we're talking about leaders, Martin, you're back. Hello. I'm going to come back to you and ask you a little bit about how you see the how empowering developers can improve the process right across the business. In terms of other areas, security, that kind of thing, how does focusing on improving the process have good side effects?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, can you hear me? I had a bit
You
of
are
a
good.
technical malfunction. Yeah, so I think this aligns well with kind of like the modern DevOps and kind of security paradigm. So if you're able to provide developers with kind of golden pathways and access to the necessary tools and resources and information, they're able to, innovate and develop better solutions. And it's also easy for the business to see precisely what's going on. A critical part of this is making sure the information is shifted left. I think one thing we've done wrong as an industry is we say shift left, and we've just shifted the work left and burdened everyone with that. No offense to my full stack engineers out there. But I think another part of it is, the camera's gone. Okay, that's fine.
It was funny.
Do you hear me?
It looked like you fell.
We do, we do hear you, Martin.
Okay, I'll continue. Yeah. Yeah, so I think if we go back to kind of specifically security, instead of, say, conducting the security tests, say, further down the pipe, if we're able to run those scans early on, developers are able to make smarter decisions when they find an issue. And even, like, say, at the pull request stage or even before the code goes up, if they're able to find issues there, it's very easy to resolve those. And it's less expensive down the line. So if you take, for example, something like the Log4j vulnerability, if you're able to catch that pretty early on in the process, you then don't have to expend a bunch of resource to try and find out precisely where in your pipe it is, or where in production those vulnerabilities exist. I think also one other thing is it's important not just to flag out these issues with developers and say, hey, this is an issue. because then at that point it's a bit out of context. But if you're able to kind of flag it up and provide, say, an automated pull request, for example, or some sort of suggested solution to it, then it's very easy to resolve those problems pretty effectively and quickly. Yeah.
Thank you. You're like the voice from, I don't know, behind the curtain without the camera, but your insights are spot on. And I think there's maybe a whole other panel there in like, which things should we have shifted left that we haven't, and we should have thought of that. I think as well, you touched on security, and I think that's one of those things where developers might not necessarily see that as the thing that they are most passionate about or most urgently want to make better, but the business cares about it. And by making those things better for all of the tech disciplines, not just we're software developers, we write code, but for the rest of the picture, I think is really important. So Bruno, I'd like to come to you and ask you, like, we've talked a lot about the value of developer experience, and we've talked about it predominantly for the practitioners. How do you convince leadership that there's value for them too? In different sizes of organization, I guess this looks different, so we'll probably try and hear from everybody. But how does developer experience look? Does it always have to be a job title or a team? Is it a discipline? Tell me how you see that inside an organization.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and quite a broad one. Is it a job title, discipline? I think it's all of the above. How do you convince leadership of the value of developer experience? I think whether your organization is of one person or 5,000 people writing code, I think whether you want it or not, you have developer experience, and you're gonna soon start finding places where you spend more time doing the same thing or doing that particular thing and stopping you to evolve the business forward. And I think if you're looking to the data behind those moments, I think it becomes easier to convince leadership on where they should be investing and if they should be investing on developer experience. We do this a whole bunch here. We spend a lot of time talking to developers to see what they've been doing that's repetitive. We look into the business narrative. Where does the business want to get to? And what do we have today that propels us to get to where the business wants to get to? And what are the places where actually drags us down and makes us spend so much time doing the same thing and getting distant and more distant from the goals of the business? And I think a tip or a view that I would give is look from the side of the business and distill that into metrics and numbers, data that you can look at and present back to leadership on how you want to make that better. I think that would be the way that I would approach if you're a smaller company. If you're a bigger company, I would say focus on qualitative and quantitative metrics that you can show where your developers are struggling today, and more importantly, how you plan to fix it. Because I think that's every leader wants to hear that, right? Not just problems, but the solutions to them.
I can add something there. I can talk about Factorial and how we have evolved in terms of discipline, team, job title. So at the beginning, DX was more of a discipline. So it's something that everybody contributed to. So if you find something that needs to be fixed, go ahead and fix it. If you find code that is not good enough, improve it. If you find code that's untyped, add types. This was everybody's responsibility. And even the CI/CD pipelines, if it was too slow, maybe 2 or 3 devs just complained, came together, fixed it. But then as we began to grow, get into 80, 100, we had to form the DX team. So at that point, it moved to a team, and then this team had the responsibility of improving processes, workflows, introducing tools, and all of that. As it regards how to sell this to the business, I always say as UX is to the users, so is DX to the devs. When you have an app or you have a few users or a lot, you would want to retain them. So you would try to improve their experience because you don't want to lose them to a competitor. the same thing with devs. If you want to keep them and retain them, then you have to focus on their experience, on the X, because if you lose them, then you lose time, you lose cash, because you have to invest now in training new people, hiring new people. Imagine all of that. You could have invested all of that in the devs and then save yourself all of the stress. So I always use that analogy to help companies understand that the X is very important for the retention of developers. It also helps you ship faster because the devs can now focus on what they really want to do, which is building and creating things, while a team focuses on handling and improving their tools, their workflows, and their processes.
Yeah, I think that retention point is a really important one. I have definitely left engineering roles in the past because the tools are just in my way. I mean, I have some accessibility needs as well, so that absolutely happens to me. And I really relate to it. You know, I think that comparison, if we talk about user experience and developer experience, in my role at Reed Ockley, we make tools that other developers use in their processes. So I want to make sure we don't ship the thing that is the reason someone else's developer leaves their job. You know, we have a responsibility to our customers' developers, as well as our end users. And having done a bit of developer relations along the way, I think there's a lot of crossover between a whole bunch of those skills, and thinking about the empathy and what would help us to all work together. One thing that I wondered about when you were talking about choosing tools or establishing those golden paths is how much you lean on something like standard file formats or interoperable open standards, so that you're not actually dictating the tool, but more like laying out a best practice. That's something that's worked for me before. I work a lot in Open API. Is that the kind of thing that either of you have done as well?
Yeah, just to one small point about the previous question that I'd like to surface is a good sign of a need of a developer experience team is when you start seeing most of your developers trying to fix an internal tooling problem, and therefore not spending their time on the actual business value that they're trying to ship to the end user. And so that's a good way to see signs of it. I just wanted to add that part.
Also,
awesome.
I'm interested in Martin's perspective. I saw that he unmuted himself for the previous question.
Yeah, sorry about that. Mostly my camera's gone completely, so I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I think in my role, I get to speak to quite a lot of customers and prospects as well. And I think one thing I've certainly come across is you kind of see DevEx as a job title, as a team as well. But overall, it's probably like a blend of all three, where what I'm seeing now is kind of like people are prioritizing it as an overarching discipline within the organization. And so you tend to find now that it ties into business outcomes and business goals, because ultimately, by improving DevEx, what you're getting is people are able to focus and innovate more on the features they're building, and they're able to ship things out a lot faster. But also, to Abby's point, you're able to retain your talent. I've been in organizations where it's been frustrating to use certain tools or even certain processes. I mean, I worked for an organization where I had to create like 4 or 5 tickets just to get access to a box. If I'm wasting a week just to get my job done, what's the point, right? And so, yeah, it's important to retain people like that. But yeah, I think ultimately as well is providing, again, these templates, these standards, but in a governed way, so that, again, it's easy for people to do the right things, but difficult for them to do the wrong things.
I have a question about documentation. I'm quite curious because I know that this is one of the major bottlenecks for devs. You hear them say, I find it hard to find exactly what I need to understand how this abstraction works, or how this works, or that works. How do you handle that? Because I know that devs are not fond of creating docs. they love to use docs, but when it comes to creating these docs, it's like, oh no, I'm busy, I have things to do, and all of that. So how do you ensure that process to make sure that those docs are actually created for future references? Like in a big org like your company, Bruno, where you have 2,000 devs.
Yeah, I'm going to mix your question, Avi, a bit with your question, Lorna, on the process part. I think there are areas of the developer experience that you should govern the output instead of dictating how people do the input. I think documentation is an example of something that you can and you should give people a clear way of writing documentations, a clear way of finding those pieces of documentation. And a clear way of contributing to that, because documentation is a living thing, and there's nothing that you write once and you leave there. It has to keep evolving, because services evolve, and if it gets to a point where they don't evolve, you should question if they should be there at all, right? Which is a whole different discussion on getting rid of things. Here we try our best, and in places we are quite far from that. But we try our best to give developers the right tool, a clear way of doing it, and support them when they get stuck. Ultimately, the owners of the code base are the business units, and so it's at their discretion how much docs they write, how much tests they write, for instance. But what we can do is we can show what good looks like. And that's what we try to do within developer experience, is have our stuff documented, well documented, complete, but alive, right? I hope I answer your question, AB.
Wonderful. And
You answered, but I found a question in the Q&A, which is exactly what I was asking. Let me say something that has helped me over time, and it's actually very funny, but I learned it from a senior dev called Jenar. He's now a senior staff engineer. He was my EM when I first joined Factorial. And every time I ask him something, he would send me a reply with a link. I'm like, okay. So one day I said, do you know that you have a nickname, which is RWAL? And he's like, what's that? I said, it means to respond with a link. And he said, why I do that is to always keep docs up to date. So if anybody asks something, do not answer that question. Do not say, oh, this is how this works. Go to the docs and get the link. And if it's not there, add it and send that link. That way you get people to constantly improve documentation. And I find that it has worked a lot for us in Factorial, always having people answer with a link as opposed to the real answer to the question.
I really like that, and it's something that I like to do myself as well. Other things that I've done to help engineers who think they are not writers to be more successful at writing, it doesn't always improve their attitude, but it does improve their output, is just to try to better support them. This shouldn't be hard. I certainly work with a lot of non-native English speakers in companies where we use English as the main language, and that can feel like such a big hurdle. So having clear content types, clear structure, templates for everything, and have a little bit of documentation tooling in the continuous integration sites for those docs tools. I mean, Redocly makes docs platforms, right? So we have some great tools and we use them all ourselves, sometimes excessively, but I enjoy it. So making sure that we've got, link checkers, format linting, just trying to have their backs so that when they write something down, they can request a review from the tech writers report to me as well in developer experience. Like, we can just back them up. But trying to make it easier for them to write it down. A lot of engineers think that developers don't write words, but the bad news for them is the good ones do.
Yeah, and I think sorry, Martin, go for it.
Martin,
I was just going to say, one other thing I've noticed with some of our customers is kind of creating automated workflows as standards. And so when a team onboards, they might have like let's say a repository that's opened up with an example README, and that links back into an internal developer portal. And so then it's a lot easier to start with the boilerplate and kind of invites people to kind of write into these things. Like, I always hated writing documentation. Like, I'll put my hand up and say that. But if it's easier and you have like a central point to go to, that makes my life a bit easier as well.
Bruno, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Alberto asked an interesting question, which is essentially developers enjoy complaining about what is happening, but when you ask them to do something, they normally shy away from that. And I would say, what I would say to that, Alberto, is that happens everywhere. And a good approach to this is, and by the way, this is not a short-term approach; it's a long-term approach. Is to build a culture, and you're going to find that a good developer experience company has culture behind it, right? And it's constantly evolving, sometimes changing. And I would say lead by example. Sometimes you need to hold the developer by hand and then get the information that you need to get from them, and then stage them, show that they contributed, make it fun for others to do the same, and again, that's not a short-term approach, but it works most of the time in my experience.
Also, something else that can help is trying to keep the docs as close to code as possible. So when you're shipping code, you can also ship the doc as part of your PR. That way, they don't have to leave their code editor and go to Notion or elsewhere to go write documentation. So if they have to write it at the same time that they are shipping code, it makes it easier. So you can have the README docs for every domain or every component that is built, and ask that it always be updated with the code that is shipped. That way, you don't have any excuse because it's just part of your workflow on a good day.
Some really solid advice here. And I love that we pivoted from business value into docs, which just benefits everybody. And to my mind, I mean, I'm very biased, right? Because I'm an engineer with a writing problem, and but seeing that as such a core pillar of DevEx makes me very happy. We are pretty much at time, so I will wrap this up. It's been truly insightful. I am so confident that there are plenty of goodies in this session that all of you can take back to the office and use in your own practice and in your own teams. I'm hugely appreciative of all the panelists, everything that they so generously shared with us and gave us from their experience and from their insights. So thank you so much for all of that. It's been a really great panel. We will all be heading over to the Lead Dev Slack now. We'll be in the Effective Teams channel for at least the next few minutes. So if you have more questions for our panelists, or if you want to chat over anything else with us, please join us over there. We'll be very happy to see you. Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks everyone.